Start on page 261, I believe. Yes, 261. So some of you might have read this story or know a story similar to it. But the reason that we're reading this story is because today you're going to be doing your book talk discussions, right? You're going to be talking about the books you've been reading with 2 or 3 other people. And you guys have to be able to make good comments with each other. So we're going to go through this story, and then we're going to look at what kind of comments can we make about the character, about the conflicts in the story, and maybe even what we think after the story is completed. Similar to things that you're reading, you always have characters, you always have conflicts, there's always some sort of resolution. So we're going to look at those types of things today. So is everybody on page 261? Can you give me a thumbs up if you're all there? Perfect. Okay. It says $1.87. That was all. And 60 cents of it was in pennies. Pennies saved 1 and 2 at a time by bulldozing the grocer and the vegetable man and the butcher until one's cheeks burned with the silent imputation of parsimony that such close stealing implied. 3 times Della counted it, $1.87. And the next day would be Christmas. There was clearly nothing to do but flop down on the shabby little couch and howl. So Della did it, which instigates the moral reflection that life is made up of sobs, sniffles, and smiles, with sniffles predominantly. While the mistress of the home is gradually subsiding from the first stage to the second, take a look at the home. A furnishing flat at $8 per week. It did not exactly bear description, but it certainly had the word on the lookout for the Madigan squad. In the vestibule below was a letter box into which no letter would go, and an electric box for which no mortal finger could coax a ring. Also appertaining thereunto was a card bearing the name Mr. James Dillingham Young, her husband. The Dillingham had been flung to the breeze during a former period of prosperity, when its possessor was being paid $30 per week. Now, when the income was shrunk to $20, the letters of Dillingham looked blurred, as though they were thinking seriously of contracting to a modest and unassuming deed. But whenever Mr. James Dillingham Young came home and reached his flat above, he was called Jim, and greatly hugged by Mrs. James Dillingham Young, already introduced to you as Della, which is all very good. Della finished her cry and attended to her cheeks with the powder rag. She stood by the window and looked out dully at a gray cat walking a gray fence in a gray backyard. Tomorrow would be Christmas Day, and she only had $1.87 with which to buy a present. She had been saving every penny she could for months, with this result. $20 a week doesn't go far. Expenses had been greater than she had calculated. They always were. Only $1.87 to buy a present for Jim. Her Jim. Many a happy hour she had spent planning for something nice for him, something fine and rare and sterling, something just a little bit near to being worthy of the honor of being owned by Jim. There was a pier glass between the windows of the room. Perhaps you had seen a pier glass in an $8 flat. A very thin and very agile person may, by observing his reflection in a rapid sequence of longitudinal strips, obtain a fairly accurate conception of his looks. Della, being slender, had mastered the art. Suddenly she whirled from the window and stood before the glass. Her eyes were shining brightly, but her face had lost its color within 20 seconds. Rapidly she pulled down her hair and let it fall to its full length. Now there were 2 possessions of the James Dillingham Youngs in which they both took a mighty pride. One was Jim's gold watch that had been his father's and his grandfather's. The other was Della's hair. Had the Queen of Sheba lived in the flat across the air shaft, Della would have let her hair hang out the window some days to dry, just to depreciate her Majesty's jewels and gifts. Had King Solomon been the janitor, with all his treasures piled up in the basement, Jim would have pulled out his watch every time he passed, just to see him pluck at his beer from empty. So we're going to take a pause right here. I know there are a lot of really, really big words that maybe you guys don't understand, but we're just going to skip over those words. We can look at those later. But we're going to talk about two main things. Who are the main characters? Question one, what is the main character like at the beginning of the story? So, using this track your thinking, I'm going to use an I noticed. So, if each of you can go to your writer's notebook, on a blank sheet of paper, I'm going to write Gift of the Magi. That's the title of the story. So I'm going to write out what I noticed. I noticed that Della really loves her husband. Does anybody remember her husband's name? Perfect. That's her husband, Jim. Do you guys remember why she loves him or what she says about how she loves him? What does she do when he gets home every day? Oh, good. She gives him a big hug. Oh, yeah. Okay, perfect. So now we know kind of who Della is. Looking back at this track your thinking, we're going to look at what the central issue is. So what's the conflict? Does anybody know what conflict is? Yes. Perfect. So let's write that down. Everybody write this with me. The central issue is does anybody remember how much money she has?
$20.
Oh,
But the thing is $80.
So now we know kind of who Della is and we know what the main conflict is. So now I want you guys, just based on what you read, to write an if I were statement. So you're going to write, if I were Della, and then what would you do?
Okay, so what we're doing here is we're modeling using this tracking your thinking sheet. Okay, so what Mrs. Bailey has written up here, you should write as well so that you can see what this looks like. But now you're doing your own statement that's kind of based on what you're thinking as we've been reading this so far. If I were Della, what?
If I were Della, I would give him a big hug.
She already does that.
Merry Christmas. Then she will be better.
This is just 1 minute of quiet writing.
If I were Della, I would just hug him.
You don't have to say that loud, Dada.
How do you spell her name?
Okay, I'm going to give you guys just another 15 seconds to write your statement down. And then I might call on you at random, so make sure you have something written. So you guys have about 5 more seconds left. Okay, perfect. So does anybody want to volunteer to share their statement? No? Okay.
I would just try my best to do whatever it would be like Peter said. I don't know.
Okay. Can I have country shirt that you wrote?
If I were Della, I would find the nicest gift that I could afford for the money I have.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Yeah, but I don't go.
Okay, everybody make sure you get your
I would probably try to like do small jobs or something to earn some money. Like do something to earn more.
Yeah, these are really smart solutions. Let's keep reading so we can see what happens or what Della actually does. So we're going to be at the middle of page 262 where it says, so now Della. Okay.
So now,
Alright, so it says, so now Della's beautiful hair fell about her rippling and shining like a cascade of brown waters. It reached below her knee, so it's really long, and made itself a garment for her. And then she did it up again nervously and quickly. Once she faltered for a minute and stood still, while a tear or two splashed on the worn red carpet. So where they lived was kind of an old place. On went her old brown jacket, on went her old brown hat, with a whirl of skirts and with a brilliant sparkle still in her eyes. She fluttered out the door and down the stairs to the street. Where she stopped, the sign read, Sofrani, hair goods of all kind. One flight up, Della ran and collected herself. Painting Madame, large, too white, chilly, hardly looked, the Sofrani. Will you buy my hair? Asked Della. I buy hair, said Madame. Take your hat off and let's have a sight at the looks of it. Down rippled the brown cascade. $20, said Madame, lifting the mass with a practiced hand. Give it to me quickly, said Della. Oh, and the next 2 hours tripped by on rosy wings. Forget the hashed metaphor. She was ransacking the store for Jim's present. She found it at last. It surely had been made for Jim and no one else. There was no other like it in any of the stores, and she had turned them all of them inside out. It was a platinum fob chain, simple and chaste in design, properly proclaiming its value by substance alone and not by meretricious ornamentation, meaning it was simple. As all good things should do, it was even worthy of the watch. As soon as she saw it, she knew that it must be Jim's. It was like him, quietness and value, the description applied to both. $21 they took from her for it, and she hurried home with the 87 cents. With that chain on his watch, Jim might be properly anxious about the time in any company. Grand as the watch was, he sometimes looked at it on the sly, on account of the old leather strap that he used in place of a chain. When Della reached home, her intoxication gave way a little to prudence and reason. She got out her curling irons and lit the gas and went to work repairing the ravages made by generosity added to love, which is always a tremendous task. Dear friends, a mammoth task. Within 40 minutes, her head was covered with tiny clothesline curls that made her look wonderfully, like a truant schoolboy. She looked at her reflection in the mirror, long, carefully, and critically. So we're going to pause right there. Just from what we've read, what do we know has just happened? So right here. We know that we accomplished that she didn't have enough money. Yes.
So she went to this one guy who was like, cut my hair. And then she got money, and then she got her husband, or whatever, a gift. And then it was a watch. It was a watch, and then she went home, and yeah.
Perfect. So we're going to write another statement together. So we're going to write, and I'm surprised that. So I'll model one. So I'm surprised. Okay, everybody should be writing this statement down with me. Okay. I'm surprised that Della was willing to donate her hair. Does anybody remember how beautiful and long, well, I just said long, how much hair she had?
Long hair.
Yeah, she said it was like below her knees. So it was super long and luscious. Yeah, like almost like Rapunzel-like. So I want you guys to look at the bottom of page 263. There are a couple of adjectives or a couple of words that describe both Jim and Della. So can you guys just name a couple of words that stand out at the bottom of page 263? So I'll give you guys an example. So on page 263, it talks about how Jim would often look at his watch, the leather strap, and he would look at it slavishly. What do you guys think that means by slavish?
It doesn't.
Yeah, like iffy. Like this isn't that great of a chain. And what about at the bottom of page 263? How do you think Della feels after she's cut off all her hair? Sad. Kind of sad, yeah. So she looked at it long, carefully, and critically. Oh. So we're gonna keep reading, and then you guys are gonna start rating.